Hello. This second lecture on academic writing and critical thinking is about the argument and argumentation. The content in this lecture is the overall argument. Is it at all an argument? Non-arguments, internal consistency, including opposing arguments, logical order, and assumptions. Let's have a closer look. The overall argument is the main message. And then you should just make a statement like, begging should be prohibited in our country. So you see it once when you formulate a sentence like that, you can argue. Contributing arguments to this could be, beggars are a nuisance to businesses and ordinary people. And beggars are often involved in crime, and they make our streets look filthy. These are arguments. Now they are not very substantiated, so you have to bring in some information to support your arguments, but nevertheless, these are arguments. You can also say that crime syndicates are behind organizing the trafficking. And as an academic, you should always check whether the argument can be falsified or not. It's, as a rule of thumb, very, very difficult to prove that something is correct, but it's much, much easier to falsify. That means that it is not correct, it is false. Is it an argument at all? Very many people are becoming very hesitant. What is an argument? What isn't? Let's have a look at it. First of all, you take a position when it is an argument. You have a point of view, a main message that you want others to accept. And then you have the reasons, the contributing arguments and propositions that support the conclusion. In the line of reasoning, you have a set of reasons in logical order leading to a conclusion. A conclusion is, as a rule of thumb again, the position you want others to accept. And then you need to persuade. Persuasion is the argument should convince your audience. And to help you, you need signal words or phrases that help your audience follow the direction of argument. So look at the signal words. We'll come back to that later. Non-arguments, there are several of them. A description. You have been told that fine with descriptions, but try to leave them behind a bit and become more analytical. So descriptions, you should try to keep down. You can never avoid them. So a description describes how something is done or what something is in academic writing. Factual, accurate, no value judgment, no reasoning, does not persuade to a point of view. That is a description. You cannot avoid them, but keep them to a minimum. Then you have something called an explanation. Explanations may include statements and reasons leading to a conclusion. However, explanations do not try to persuade to a point of view. It accounts for why or how something occurs. It draws out the meaning of a theory or argument or message. A third category of non-arguments, that's summaries. It's a reduced version of a long message or a text. It repeats the key points and reminds you of what has been said, but it is not an argument. So you have to be clear, and you are very often told when you hand in your essay in the feedback that, please, this is unclear, please clarify, etc. So make your position clear. In the introduction, in the final sentences, in the conclusion, and in the overall line of reasoning. You have to think of, am I clear? In the overall summary of the argument, if you have that, you also need to be clear. In order to be clear and facilitate the reader to follow you, you need internal consistency. To be inconsistent is not very smart. Inconsistency means you confuse the readers. Now, internal consistency means you have a clear position for all parts of the line of reasoning contribute to the conclusions. That's a consistent argument. All of it contribute to the conclusion. Inconsistencies make your line of reasoning hard to follow and weaken persuasion. Example: apples are good for your teeth, if that is your overall argument. And then suddenly it says acid corrodes. There is acid in apples, so they're bad for teeth. This is inconsistent. But you have to include opposing arguments. Of course you do. A good line of reasoning will include alternative points of view because you must show that you have considered other views. This is managed by the line of reasoning makes your main message clear, but then you have counter arguments introduced by keywords like alternatively, it might be argued, then you signal that here is another point of view. Here is another perspective. That's the counter argument. And then you rebut. You say, I acknowledge what somebody else says, but I rebut by keywords. However, nonetheless, on the other hand, that's a single word. The logical order, you group similar points together. You present reasons that support your arguments first to establish a good case. This is a kind of the lawyer trick. I present the case. You have to consider opposing reasons after you have established your own case. Don't start with opposing arguments. You start with your overall arguments, the main arguments you have to present the case, and then you've come up with your opposing reasons. You can assume. An assumption is that you can tell the audience that you simply take something for granted in the presentation of an argument. You ask your audience to accept as true, rather than spend time and energy on arguing. E.g., given that it is this and this and this way, it must follow, things like that. So that's given that, the assumption. You must assess what is a reasonable assumption and what is not. If you force an unreasonable assumption on your reader or your audience, it will not work. Assess this based on the context. Who is your audience? You always have to consider your audience. If your audience have no idea about your subject area, you have to consider that. If they're all researchers working on the area, it isn't that important. The next short lecture will be on references.